Hello, everyone. It's been a while, I know. I've been having a lot of fun with genealogy and finding about my Welsh ancestors. Not that anyone was waiting for this, but this video has been a long time coming because I am a very stubborn man and God is a very persistent, God. So he's been asking me to return to videos. And similar to a year and a half ago, I don't really know who I'm talking to or why, but I'm going to share my experience of the Book of Mormon. That's what I'm getting at. And I'm going to do it without scripts because scripts take forever for me and I want to just flow a little bit more naturally. And as I was thinking about topics I could go on, many of them I could think about, I got this prompting, just do the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to do that. I'll tell you my ideas, but I'm also going to mix in a little bit of history of Mormonism in the 80s and 90s. So I think it will be interesting. So all I'm going to do is a commentary on the Book of Mormon, starting with the very beginning, because it hooked me immediately. I was what I call primed for dissent. What had happened in the 80s is that we lived through President Benson, a prophet who was very direct that the LDS Church was wicked, that we were not obeying the Book of Mormon and taking it seriously. And so there was a big pushback then for the Book of Mormon. Now, I know a lot of other Christians say that we put the Book of Mormon before any other scripture. When I was growing up, that absolutely was not true. We studied one book per year. So Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, Doctrine and Covenants, and then the Old Testament. Somewhere in the New Testament, I may have messed up there, but I remember there being 4. So there was a big push. Now, some things happened with President Benson that were politically sensitive. He got involved with some organizations like the John Birch Society because he thought there was an imminent threat of a communist takeover of the United States. And I think anyone who knows what's going on right now realizes that there was almost a communist takeover only a few years ago. And I'm not going to get into politics. I am going to get into politics because the Book of Mormon is a very, very political book, but that will be later. What I'm going to talk about now is Nephi and his retrieval of the brass plates from Laban. I think this is a great story. The Book of Mormon to me starts out so strong that it just compels me towards the next chapters. Although I've been reading it in novel form lately, and that is a totally different experience. I strongly recommend it. You can do that in the 1830s edition. It is quaint old English, but you should be able to get the gist of it. And plus, I love Joseph's prose anyway. I think some of his descriptions of spirituality, how would I describe it? They're like the pinnacle of writing on the spiritual. I'm not going to go into exactly why I believe the Book of Mormon is true or how I believe it's true or what I think it's doing, at least in this video. So first off, I always say this, the Book of Mormon got me in 1 Nephi chapter 1, verse 1, paragraph 1. Let me read that out for you. He says, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, therefore I was taught somewhat in all the learning of my father, and having seen many afflictions in the course of my days, nevertheless, having been highly favored of the Lord in all my days, yea, having had a great knowledge of the goodness and mysteries of God. So, as I said, I was primed for dissent. President Benson had been doing this particular style of preaching. When he died, Hunter came in, I think it was 9 months or something. He didn't really do much. I don't even remember his theme. But then Hinckley came in. So Gordon B. Hinckley became the prophet in, looks like 1995 exactly. Now, in between, when President Benson died and Hinckley, a lot of radical things happened in Mormonism. So in 1993, there were 6 very prominent Mormon academics, who were excommunicated. They're known as the September 6. It included mostly Abraham Gileadi, Maxine Hanks, because of her, I think she wrote the book, Mormon, let's see, what did she call it? Mormonism and Reemerging Feminism. Okay. Anyway, so she was excommunicated. D. Michael Quinn, who needs no introduction. I think he came back. Paul Toscano. I haven't seen these names in like 30 years, so it's kind of fun to read them because they were such incredible people who are questioning the very core of Mormonism. There was no internet. There was just this big secret place called the archives, and very few people had access to them. But some of these people did. I think many of them did. And they started challenging the narrative that the LDS Church had kept pretty strongly for 150 years, 180 years, whatever it is. 200 years since Joseph Smith? Okay, that's a long time. That's a long time. So anyway, then also President Benson talked about the Book of Mormon, the warnings of our wickedness. Then Hinckley came in and he was like so positive. It was all optimism. It was just the church is growing. We have more temples than ever. I think he said like we will see 100 temples in our lifetime. And now there are hundreds of temples, just like he said. But for me, that was doctrinal whiplash. Like it was so opposite of President Benson that I had to think that there was something going on in the highest levels of leadership. D. Michael Quinn just released his book, I think, called Origins of Power, which talked about how Brigham Young was able to secure the power necessary to create the Latter-day Saint branch of Mormonism. Anyway, back to Nephi. As I said, I was primed for dissent. So when I'm reading some of these scriptures, when I did 30 years ago, these verses, it was with the assumption that the church might be astray. I had not decided that yet at the time. But I will go through a little bit more in 1 Nephi where it increased my idea that I wasn't living a righteous life. So then we go down to verse 4. And for it came to pass in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, my father, Lehi, having dwelt at Jerusalem all his days, and in that same year there came many prophets prophesying unto the people that they must repent or the great city of Jerusalem must be destroyed. I have to clearly state that I apply this Book of Mormon to me directly. I don't believe this book was written to the Jews or mainstream Christians or anyone else. There's something about this book that affects the hearts of Mormons, and I'll explain that a little bit more later on. But in this case, it was, there came many prophets prophesying unto the people that they must repent, or the great, talking about applying it to me. When they say Jew in the Book of Mormon, all I hear is Mormon. And when they say Jerusalem, the only thing I hear is Salt Lake City. Here we go. He says there's many prophets coming. Depending on who you are, you probably don't know that if you're straight LDS, there are many prophets out here right now declaring the wickedness of the people, including me. I'm here to say that we're a wicked people. Wicked, wicked, wicked. And then we read again, Lehi, as he went forth, prayed unto the Lord, yea, even with all his heart in behalf of his people. I've always loved this about every single prophet in the Book of Mormon. No matter what, or missionary, they always knelt down in humility and prayed for their people. I don't believe there's a story in the Book of Mormon where there was ever a command to annihilate or genocide or do any things that the Old Testament discusses. So I've always enjoyed that about Mormon prophets, and it is something I want to emulate. Okay, so now we say that in verse 7, we're talking about Lehi still. And it came to pass that he returned to his own house at Jerusalem, and he cast himself on the bed, being overcome with the Spirit and the things which he had seen. This may be totally off topic, but I was watching the movie Heretic, which is about those two sister missionaries who get trapped in this basically horror house, and a guy challenges their beliefs at a very fundamental level. It's definitely worth watching, I think. The guy at the end came to the wrong conclusion, and it has interesting implications for Mormonism because I'm not going to ruin it. But whatever the case is, he ended up believing that Satan's plan was the one that worked. The idea of agency is woven throughout the movie. Anyway, it's worth seeing. I know most of you probably can't see it. There's some really bloody parts, but I really enjoyed it. So anyway, what I'm saying is I have experienced these things too, where the Spirit was so powerful and the light and knowledge and visions shown to me were so powerful that all I could do was fall into my bed, collapse, and then just exhausted, to the point where sometimes I've prayed, God, that's enough. I can't handle any more revelation. You may find once you start getting revelation that not all of it is fun to get. And I always remember Enoch in the book of Moses, I think it's chapter 7, where God shows him the wickedness of mankind, and all he can do is mourn and cry and I think really despise humanity. And he asks God, how can you allow this to happen? And then God shows him the plan of salvation and leads him through Noah and the flood and all the way down to the crucifixion and resurrection. But it gives me comfort to know that it's okay to be on the edge of hopelessness, because Moroni was too, with the final battles of the Nephites and Lamanites. And when I look at the world today, I just say the term Nephites and Lamanites. They're just murdering and killing each other. And we'll go into that later when Moroni is trying to protect Zarahemla from the Gadian robbers. So we come back here, and then it says, Lehi prayed unto the Lord, And there came a pillar of fire and dwelt upon rock before him. And he saw and heard much. And because of the things which he saw and heard, he did quake and tremble exceedingly. When I was raised, I was, of course, raised in the Book of Mormon, was literal. And so when I read these things, I saw images of Lehi in his house with a literal column of fire, and God was speaking through it. This isn't an unusual idea. I think in Charlton Heston's movie of the Ten Commandments, made in probably the 50s, had a literal column of fire and smoke leading the children of Israel, to Israel. I don't believe that anymore. What I believe is that Joseph Smith was using words, the best words he knew. And when you will find that image of light everywhere and the burning heat of revelation and God. I know some people assign that to hell, but this is a different kind. It's almost a consuming by the Spirit. All my life, I wanted to be consumed by the Spirit and live my life in that realm at all times. And I have since learned that is not God's plan. I've always wanted to escape this life. And when I thought it was all going to happen, God instead tells me to come back and do some things, which I'm going to try and do. So anyway, that's where I think a lot of the language in the Book of Mormon, that's when I first started thinking, wait a minute, this is metaphorical and this is deeper than a literal history. So that's what I believe, is that these words were just Joseph Smith's inadequate attempt to describe the power of the Spirit. Okay, so we go down a little bit more, and then while Lehi was on the bed, overcome by the Spirit, and Lehi was carried away in a vision, even that he saw the heavens open, and he thought he saw God sitting upon his throne, surrounded by numberless concourses of angels in the attitude and singing and praising their God. This scripture, this particular verse, is very important to me because it started me thinking, what is an angel? What does it look like? Can I see an angel in this life? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And even here, when we talk about thrones, I don't see the iron throne with God on top, sitting on it. He's not talking about a seat or what humans would call a seat, a throne. It's 100% symbolism. The throne represents the power of the sovereign, and not a literal throne or literal clouds or harps or whatever people see. So then he says, and it came to pass that I saw one descending out of the midst of heaven, and he beheld that his luster was above that of the sun and noonday. And he also saw 12 others following him, and their brightness did exceed that of the stars of the firmament. Okay, the sun, moon, and star symbolism is one of my favorite parts about Mormon cosmology. The Book of Abraham, which is one of my favorite, and I'll probably do commentary on that too, and I understand its problematic origin, and that's not too important to me. Then we continue. And this man, this angel, or this what did they call him? They called him one descending out. They don't say anything. And he says, and he came down to earth, this angel, forth upon the face of the earth. And he first came and stood before my father and gave unto him a book. Again, symbolism. A book is a source of knowledge of. Now, this is something I've always been interested in with Mormonism, our obsession with records of other people, from the Mulekites to the Jaredites. And now here, and of course the Book of Mormon. And then here we see that Lehi is also given a book that is a representation of the knowledge God will give all of us. And as he read, he was filled with the Spirit of the Lord. So for many of you who have read the Book of Mormon, you don't need an explanation for this, because you have also experienced that when you read the Book of Mormon, something happens. I want to talk about later why I think the Book of Mormon does that, but I believe it literally, just the act of reading it, will open your mind and heart to the truth. And so that's why I continually read it. I'm always reading it. And the reason is because I think when you read like this story I'm reading right now of angels and visions and heavens opening before you, for me, it opened my mind, blew it open. And I started finally believing in this full revelatory God who will speak to me directly, and angels, and visions and dreams. I think that's what the Book of Mormon does when you start seeing it as metaphor, or greater than a literal history. And then in in verse 13, we read that the angel says, "Woe, woe unto Jerusalem," or Salt Lake City, "for I have seen thine abominations, and the city shall be destroyed." Now, when I hear Salt Lake City, I also believe it means literally the city of Salt Lake, but also as a metaphor for the aborted attempt at Zion that turned out to be the Latter-day Saint Church, and the others too. Unfortunately, just like the Book of Mormon says, as soon as you get prosperity, down. Okay, so, and that they shall be carried away captive into Babylon. These are the Jews. Now, of course, that's a literal event in the Bible. It's not in the Book of Mormon for the Jews. It's in the Book of Mormon for the Mormons, okay? And I believe we were carried away captive into Babylon. Brigham Young, I think, was a prophet of performances and ordinances. He set up the church to be very successful, and I think he did a great job. I know there were some controversies around that, but 200 years later, we can see that what he established worked. There was a statement, I think, from him, and I may be getting this wrong, but it's something like, I care about helping the saints thrive today, and the millennium can take care of itself. And I've always loved that, but I think that's what happened, is a 200-year, well, more like, let's see, Joseph 1844. So 180 years, almost exactly, since Joseph Smith died. I feel that's the point where the church, the Latter-day Saint Church, rejected the higher law, was given the lower law of performances and ordinances, and has been remembering God through those performances and ordinances for 180 years. Let's see, carried away into Babylon. I 100% believe that the Latter-day Saint Church has been carried away into Babylon. Back to the angel, oh wait, and it came to pass that when my father had read and seen many great and marvelous things. You know, I hear a lot of Mormons talk about, first of all, let me just get this straight. Let me just put it out there. I don't believe you need to be a Mormon to receive revelation from God. Often we were told that everyone has, let's see, what do they call it? The light of Christ, I think. It's been a while, it's been 30 years. But that only the church, only members of the church who had been confirmed had the gift of the Holy Ghost. I don't believe that, and I don't believe it's scriptural, especially not Book of Mormon wise. There were so many examples of other sheep or other people who God protected and revealed things to, that it's hard for me to say that the ultimate religion is the Latter-day Saints. I just don't believe that, and I didn't believe it back then. And in the end, I came back to Mormonism because they have a special message, and it's continual revelation. Now, going back to that movie Heretic, which that is brought up, the idea of continual revelation. And it really is, or was 180 years ago, 200 years ago, it was very unique, especially among the monotheistic, well, not especially, it was 100% unique among the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and now Mormonism. Let's get back to here, to verse 14. And let's see, his dad says, he did exclaim many things unto the Lord, such as great and marvelous are thy works, O Lord God Almighty. Thy throne is high in the heavens, and thy power and goodness and mercy are over all the inhabitants of the earth. And because you are merciful, you will not suffer those who come to you that they shall perish. This is something, I remember someone talked to me about negative theology, which is not a bad thing. But negative theology is this idea that God is so grand, so big, so ineffable that you cannot even use positive attributions, because any positive attribution you give him would fall short of what he truly is. And I feel that this verse goes over that. And his soul did rejoice, and his whole heart was filled because what he had seen. And that has been my experience too, that when I'm seeing the wickedness of mankind and I'm almost near hopelessness, I'm praying hard, like really hard to love humanity. And I have a problem with that. It's hard for me. But there's always these times where in the deepest despair, it's like, it's over. I hate existence and this mortality. And then God will just touch me with this little light that he gives me and this love. And he says, it's worth it. Keep going. I know it seems horrible, but it's worth it. And so that has helped me many times to just say, it's not a thought, it's an experience. I guess, I don't know how to describe it. Like Nephi here. There are not words, I don't know the words that are possible to describe the glory of God. I just do my best and, go from there. So now we're going to jump down to verse 18. And he says that after the Lord had shown, this is, I think, Nephi again. Let me see. Yeah, it's Nephi again. And he says, that after the Lord had shown so many marvelous things unto my father, Lehi, yea, concerning the destruction of Jerusalem or Salt Lake City, and metaphorically, all of Latter-day Saints. This is what I thought 30 years ago. And I was scared that I was one of them, the tares. Once I got in my mind the possibility that I was wicked, that I was wrong, that I was being deceived, suddenly I was terrified. I'm like, well, how do you know what the truth is? And God showed me what the truth is and how to get it. And I would like to share that with you. It's all in the Book of Mormon. It's all in the Book of Mormon. It's a very, very practical guide for me. If you believe it's a metaphor, if you believe it can open your mind and heart to the truth. Okay, so now we say, and the Jews did mock him because of the things which he testified of them, for he truly testified of their wickedness and abominations. And I don't know how everyone else feels, but when I started questioning, so I like to say I intellectually apostatized. There was nothing major that went on. I just slowly detached from LDS beliefs. And let's see, what did I say? Oh, the mocking. I know that's obviously people say, oh, they're laughing at you and they're making fun of you. But I think that's also the persecution that you feel. Because I think when you start bringing up certain verses in the Book of Mormon that clearly condemn us, the Latter-day Saints, or was back then, I consider myself, surprise, surprise, a Gnostic Mormon. But that mocking is not a pleasurable experience. And I know many of you have experienced it also. It feels like rejection to me. And I say, but it says it in the scriptures that we're wicked. And they just couldn't hear that. And so there was mocking. You get the mocking like, oh, you're an antichrist, or, they dismiss you as I think all of you understand or know what I mean by dismissing everything about you. This one thing I didn't like about Latter-day Saints is their control over my own spiritual experiences. It's very subtle because they say everyone can have personal revelation unless it contradicts the church. And sometimes it's not said that explicitly, but there's always that feeling of, hey, God gave me a revelation to tell me to do this. And people just go, are you sure? Are you sure? So anyway, we go to further on. When the Jews heard these things, they were angry with him. That anger, that burning anger that someone dare suggest that enduring to the end isn't good enough. That we are, what does he say? I think it's Nephi. He says, talking about faith and works. It is by faith that we're saved after all we can do. I see a lot of mainstream Christians. They're like, oh, well, Mormons don't believe in grace because of that. Now, my experience has been that they're inseparable, faith and works. Obviously, when I have faith, I automatically do works. And if I'm not doing those works, to me, I feel like I don't have that faith, right? So anyway, I don't know where I went with that, but the Jews heard this and they were angry with him. And that anger is very intense. And it makes them uncomfortable to think you're questioning the core foundation of Mormonism's beliefs, which I think we should be doing. So Lehi takes his family into the wilderness and they leave all their property. That's an interesting experience because when I first woke up, an experience I'll talk about in another video, when I first truly decided to dedicate my life to God, I remember giving all my, in this case, role-playing books away because I was obsessed with role-playing and fantasy and all that kind of stuff. And at that moment, I decided to leave all that property behind. But the idea that property makes us, well, basically prosperity Christianity is something I've always had a problem with. I can't think of a single time that except after Christ, the 200 years after his coming, where the people were righteous when they were rich. And I looked around at the richness of the Latter-day Saint Church, and I'm like, there's something wrong with this. Now, this is the 90s. I may be remembering this incorrectly, but I believe there was a Los Angeles Times expose on Mormonism's finances. And at the time, they said it was about $4 billion. And it broke down what they thought tithing would bring in. And then, of course, all the church's investments. And that was what they came up with. So I believe that the connection to wealth and property is questionable at best. And I've lived my life like that. Okay, so we get down and it says, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto my father, yea, even in a dream. People say, did you speak? What did it sound like? Was God's eternal lips moving? Did he have a tongue? Was it coming in my eardrums? And that, I think, is a stumbling block for you. One of the core things I asked in the Book of Mormon when it started talking about revelations and dreams is this idea that I did not understand how all this worked. So I don't know what I thought back then, because if to speak means he has to just come down physically on the earth, appear to Nephi, and go from there. But anyway, the Lord spake unto my father, even in a dream. I'm not going to go into that exactly, except that my dreams have been a core part of my spiritual experience. And I used to have awesome dreams. There was a time when my dreams and waking life were indistinguishable. The mysteries I was being shown, I would go to sleep, live in a totally different world, that supernatural world. And then I would wake up and the world was the same for me. And I didn't know which one was real. And I think that's awesome. Probably shouldn't put that in. I'm going to put this in the video because you may find that happening to you because you're searching for a man in white robes, tall white European man in completely perfectly pressed robes, red hair. Not me. I'm not talking about me. You know what freaking picture I'm talking about. It's in every single chapel. I had to unlearn what I thought God was like. And I think this is scriptural because it was the same with the brother of Jared. He didn't know. He didn't know at all what God looked like. It was a disembodied spirit, right? How could he? He thought God was a disembodied spirit. And then we find when God touches the stones, the brother of Jared just pulls back. Wait a minute. God has a physical body? And I've experienced similar things where what I thought and what I was expecting from God and messengers did not turn out to be true. They were different than I expected. And then we go a little bit further more. As they're leaving Jerusalem, Lehi left his house and the land of his inheritance and his gold and his silver and his precious things. I feel like you are going to have to go through that. That has been my experience. It's been the experience of people throughout history who've worshiped this God, is that you have to be willing to give up your gold and silver. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I remember when I was younger, I was ambitious. I'm going to rule the world or whatever. And I was standing on the second floor of the Hotel Utah. And I remember looking out at it and saying, one day I will have a house this big. I will have wealth beyond imagining. And that's, in the beginning of my life, that's how I lived it. And then I slowly turned another way. And I'm glad I did because there are some things you need to give up to sacrifice in order to get higher laws. Now, I'm not saying that this is your struggle. It was my struggle for sure. This thirst for prosperity, basically. But when I started reading the Book of Mormon, my heart started changing, and it changed quite a bit over my life. But I'll go over that later. Okay, then we skip a little bit, quite a bit actually. And I think that's what I skipped was when he went to the valley and made the altars and named the rivers, that kind of stuff. So then we say, now he spake, this is Lehi again, because of the stiff-neckedness of Laman and Lemuel, for behold, they did murmur in many things against their father, because he was a visionary man. Prophets look crazy. Many times they look crazy. So I expect that. I expect you're visionary man. You're foolish. You're crazy, literally insane. I like those words. I know they're offensive to some, but I think they're really fun. So then, Laman and Lemuel don't believe that Jerusalem, either metaphorically or literally, that great city could be destroyed. And when I first started saying to people, hey, I noticed that we're at the top of the pride cycle and that, all these other things were going wrong that I believe the Book of Mormon explicitly says. And then I just heard that. No, this is the last time. There's no one else. We're the final revelation. Then we go a little bit farther. And I hate to bring this home, but I faced so much persecution when I said we should be searching for the mysteries. And ever said, you're looking beyond the mark. You're looking beyond the mark. And I would part of me would really say, have you even read the Book of Mormon? Have you even read it? And I fear that many did not. I mean, obviously they didn't, because that's what Benson was talking about. You guys aren't reading it. And that's why I think they have never questioned. But here we go. And I, Nephi, being exceedingly young, and also having a great desire to know the mysteries of God. That has always driven me. Nephi drives me forward. This whole first Nephi. It's one of my favorite parts of the Book of Mormon. And it drives me because the great desires to know the mysteries of God. That desire eventually consumed me, and I found many of those mysteries. God showed me those mysteries, and they're incredible, and they're beautiful. And I did cry unto the Lord, and behold, he did visit me. This is another one where I would suggest that we don't know what visit means. Does it mean that God sits on your couch? I mean, there's some things to question of what a visit means. And I would just ask you to be open, like the brother of Jared. I mean, he didn't know, but be open to the possibility that God may not appear to you as you expect. All right, and continue going. Then Nephi cries unto the Lord for his brothers. I don't mean to compare religions, but here we go. I've always had a problem with the Old Testament. I've always thought that the Jehovah of the Old Testament, how could he possibly be the God of the New Testament? The things that the God of the Old Testament commanded, the children of Israel and later, are just horrific. They are beyond horrific. And I don't see that in the Book of Mormon ever at all. It's always on their knees praying for the welfare of their people. And I've always enjoyed that. Then Nephi, he says to Nephi, "Blessed art thou, Nephi, because of thy faith, for you have sought me diligently with lowliness of heart." I do not have lowliness of heart, I'll be honest with you. And that has been a stumbling block for me my whole life. It's still a stumbling block. When I'm on my knees praying, God, please give me, what did I say? I say something like, destroy my stiff neck and hard heart. And sometimes my heart is too hard. And it was recently, actually. I love God because it has been my experience that sometimes when I sin and I lose connection to God and to revelation, and that can happen through, that's another one you should be aware of. It's not a constant spiritual, deluge, basically. For me, it's been on and off. Like he'll give me a huge project to do. I do it. And then at the end of it, it's like, okay, just live a normal life now. And that's hard to do, to come down from that level of spirituality. But it's also painful up there sometimes. This mortal frame cannot understand that. Okay, this is something, I'll be honest, that confuses me about the Book of Mormon. And this says, "And inasmuch as ye shall keep my commandments, ye shall prosper." I don't get why that's a good thing. Because every time the Nephites prospered, it just went to hell. Everything failed. They became proud. They became wicked. They kicked people out of their synagogues because they weren't righteous enough or didn't wear the right clothes. And I always took that to heart because I had other stuff going on. Like me and my brother and my sisters dressed us very stylishly because I was raised a pretty Orthodox Mormon. And so that meant white shirts, nondescript ties, narrow at the time, narrower. So me and my brother, dressed by my sisters, had loud paisley ties and with bright, vivid colors, and also socks that were what do you call them? Not Argyle. Yeah, they are Argyle socks. And so it was this little splash of individuality that didn't get us in trouble, but it made some of the members uneasy. So lowliness of heart, I didn't have it, and I really don't have it now. And it damns me so much. But like I said, God is a patient God who has strong desire to communicate with us. And so he's always there for me. And I know he wasn't always. I didn't perceive it as he was always there for me, but that's what ended up happening. Then Nephi goes through the next part about the interplay between the Nephites and Lamanites. That back and forth between the Nephites and Lamanites, I've always loved it. But the biggest one I love is the inversion of the righteousness of those two people. Because very often, the most wicked people were the Nephites, and the most righteous people were the Lamanites. And then they would just switch until the end when they were both outrageously wicked. But here we hear the prophecy that Lehi gives. And he says, "Inasmuch as thy brethren shall rebel against thee, they shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord. And you shall be made a ruler and teacher over them. I will curse them, even with a sore curse, and they shall have no power over thy seed, except they shall rebel against me also." This is a theme in the Book of Mormon, and I think fundamentally, one of the fundamental aspects of Mormonism, and that is one of agency. We have the right to choose. And I love this, except they should rebel against you. Throughout the Book of Mormon, the Nephites are constantly chastised for rebelling against the greater light. And that is something I've also loved about Mormonism, is this idea of damnation only comes to those only who have the greater light. You cannot be condemned for a law that you did not know. I think that's a beautiful part of Mormonism. This is where the story starts with Laban. Lehi tells his sons to go back and get the brass plates, which had the genealogy of their fathers, as well as basically the Torah. The 5 books of the what do they call those? The Pentateuch, I think. The first 5 books of the Bible. So he says, "You and your brothers need to go to the house of Laban and seek the records." And his brothers, of course, murmured again, except for Sam, and dragged their feet, which is fine. Okay, and then this is what was a scripture mastery back in 1990s. And it says, so Nephi has been commanded to go back by his father. And he says, "I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded. For I know that the Lord giveth no commandments unto the children of men, save he shall prepare a way for them, that they may accomplish the thing which he commands them." That has gotten me through an awful lot of hard spots, because he has commanded me to do things that seem absolutely impossible. But I do them anyways. I actually have a sticker here called "Do." And it's a reminder that when God commands us to do something, sometimes we have to do it by faith and just follow through, whether we know the reason or not. So Nephi says he'll go do it. His brothers follow him. And then they get back to Jerusalem and they cast lots to see who goes in. And Laman gets the first lot. So he goes into Laban and he says, Laman desired of Laban the records which were engraven upon the plates of brass, which contained the genealogy of my father. And behold, Laban was angry and cast him out of his presence. And Laman fled out of his presence. And so he got back to the brothers and says, okay, Laban almost killed me. It's over. And then Nephi says again, as the Lord liveth, and as we live, we will not go down unto our father in the wilderness until we have accomplished the thing which the Lord has commanded us. This idea of commandments, that God will give you commandments, personal commandments of the higher light of which everyone is privy to as they draw closer to God. So then Nephi says, well, let's try it again, but this time we're going to give money for it. And their gold and silver that they left behind. So they go in. Laban once again sees it. He's greedy. He takes it all and then tries to kill them again. And so they run away. And then we get down here, said, it is wisdom in God that we should obtain these records, the brass plates, and preserve unto our children the language of our fathers. This idea that scriptures are so important that without them entire nations dwindle in unbelief and are destroyed is found throughout the Book of Mormon. That records are important, that they keep us anchored. So I've always had that idea that the scriptures are exceptionally important. And that was largely from this story. Then it came to pass that we went to Laban and we desired the records. We gave him all our gold and silver. And then he took it all because he lusted after it, thrust us out and sent his servants to kill us. And so they run outside the gates and hide in a cave, I think. Did they hide in a cave? A cavity of a rock. And Laman and Lemuel just start wailing on Nephi. And I think Sam too. And they just smite us even with a rod. And then an angel of the Lord came and stood before them, and he spake unto them. So often, when I was growing up, I thought incredible things like angelic visitations and visions and dreams only happen to righteous people. And a lot of times I thought, sorry, God, I'm just not righteous enough. I don't deserve that. But when I read this verse, it really shook me. I said, wait a minute, the wicked can see angels? I know that's obvious with Saul and Paul and that kind of stuff. But there was something about this that just triggered in me, you can see an angel. You can see this. So I took that to heart. And then at the end it says, the Lord will deliver Laban into your hands. This will lead into what I think is one of the greatest moral dilemmas of Mormonism. Not an internal narrative problem, but people see what Nephi's about to do to Laban, and they will leave the church because of what he did, which I think is interesting. And I'll go into why I didn't, or why I think Nephi's actions were justified. So then Nephi, says God can achieve anything. And then finally, and this is actually, again, this do thing is Nephi says, I was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. I had always lived a life where I basically had a moral system or thought process, so I knew what I was doing and why. And especially this last year and a half, where I could no longer mentally figure out or solve problems. I didn't know what to do. And God then commanded me to do some things like the videos. And I was just led by the Spirit, and I still am. I don't know beforehand the things which I should do. When I'm in my prayers, I'm like, I hope I'm doing the right thing. And often that is a very strong, you're doing okay. Just keep going. So I'm going to keep going. Okay, so Nephi finds Laban drunk, and he's fallen to the earth, passed out. And when I came to him, I found it was Laban, and I beheld his sword and the sheath thereof. And the hilt thereof was pure gold, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine. And I saw that the blade thereof was most precious steel. So then we come to what I call the Mormon trolley problem. For those of you who aren't aware of what the trolley problem is, it's a pretty fundamental philosophical concept, moral concept, where you imagine, if you will, that you are next to some train tracks. And this train track splits and goes two different directions. And a train is bearing down. On the track to the right, there are 5 people who tied to the tracks and will die if that train hits them. And on the left is one other person. And you have control of the switch to make sure where the train goes. And that's the basic. That's the most basic one. And it tells us, or rather discovers, a certain value system people have. In this case, almost everyone, well, I would assume every single person, flips the switch and would kill the one person rather than kill the five. But then it loops back around over and over. Someone will tell you, well, what if the single person is a pregnant woman? Then some people have to go, oh, yikes, that complicates things. And then they don't know if they're going to kill a pregnant woman or the five people on the other track. And then you keep adding it more and more. Well, what about this woman is a famous heart surgeon and has saved the lives of hundreds of people? Would you kill her or would you kill the five? And that just keeps going on forever and ever. It's a fun thought experiment. There's a show called The Good Place with Ted Danson, and I can't remember her other name, Kirsten Dunst or whatever. Excellent show. But he goes through the trolley problem, and it is hilarious because it's all bloody and gory. And he's getting this one guy who's a moral philosopher to just freak out because it's so complex that he can't answer the question. He cannot tell which track he's going to let the train go on to. I think that Laban and the sword is Mormonism's trolley problem. Okay, so Nephi gets the sword and he's constrained by the Spirit to kill Laban. And he just shrinks back, says, I'm not going to kill this man. And then the Spirit said to him again, behold, the Lord hath delivered him into your hands. And I also knew that he had sought to take away my own life. Yea, and he would not hearken unto the commandments of the Lord. And he also had taken away our property. And it came to pass that the Spirit said unto me again, slay him, for the Lord hath delivered him into thy hands. The Lord slayeth the wicked to bring forth his righteous purposes. It is better that one man should perish than a nation should dwindle and perish in unbelief. And when I, Nephi, had heard these words, I remembered the words of the Lord, which he spake unto me in the wilderness, saying, inasmuch as thy seed shall keep thy commandments, they shall prosper in the land of promise. Yea, and I also thought that they could not keep the commandments of the Lord according to the law of Moses, save they should have the law. And I also knew that the law was engraven upon the plates of brass. And again, I knew that the Lord had delivered Laban into my hands for this cause, that I might obtain the records according to his commandments. Therefore, I obeyed the voice of the Spirit and took Laban by the hair of his head and smote his head off. As I said, people will fall away because of this verse. And I have to be completely honest, and this is kind of callous, and I'm going to compare scriptures again, unfortunately. I don't mean to look down on other religions, but the Old Testament God was brutal beyond imagining. He commanded the children of Israel to kill every man, woman, child, even the animals. And they went place after place, just murdering and killing everyone. And I just don't see how you can return to mainstream Christianity just because of this one verse. I'm sure that's pretty controversial. But to me, Nephi's narrative, so internally, even if the Book of Mormon is literal, Nephi's narratively is morally, I think is morally right doing this. Laban because a lot of people say, well, the Lord can make it another way to make this happen, which he did. They asked Laban for the gold plates. They gave him the money. And then Laban kept refusing. And so there was no other way. Oh, one more thing about the trolley problem is this idea of, I say it at least, that when you're choosing who's going to die, I add the caveat that it's given no new information, right? Remember I started out with one person and five people on the track. And I'd say, if I'm not given any more information, I will of course kill the one versus the five. And then I keep adding information. Well, guess what? She's pregnant, she's a surgeon, all that kind of stuff. And I believe this takes place in this story for a lot of people. And I fall on the side of Nephi, that it is better for one man to die than a nation dwindle in unbelief. And I believe for Mormons today, for those of us who believe in Mormonism, that he was correct. It saved this nation, or this group of people. So for me, this isn't a big moral challenge. No more so than the trolley problem is. Nephi, after he kills Laban, goes to the treasury and he finds servant of Laban. Behold, I saw the servant of Laban, and he had the keys to the treasury. And I commanded him in the voice of Laban that he should go with me into the treasury. He supposed me to be his master, Laban, for he beheld the garments and the sword. And I told him that I should carry the engravings that were on the plates to my elder brethren who were without the walls. And he bade him that he should follow me. And he did follow Nephi. And he took him outside the city gates. Zoram thinks Nephi's taking him to the religious elders, but instead he finds that they go to Laman, Lemuel, and Sam. And Zoram is scared, rightly so. But then Nephi says, I did seize upon the servant of Laban, and I said, if he would hearken to our words, we would spare his life, and he should be a free man like unto us. Zoram did take courage of the words which I spake. And Zoram was the name of the servant, and he promised that he would go down into the wilderness unto our father. And he also made an oath unto us that he would tarry with us from the truth. I thought maybe he had a lot of people, the Zoramites might be good people, but then I remembered they were terrible. So I don't know if he was their namesake. Zoram joins them, and then they go back to Lehi and Sariah. And we find out that Sariah was exceedingly glad, for she truly had mourned because of us. And Lehi was filled with joy. And she thought we had perished in the wilderness, and complained against my father, telling him that he was a visionary man. And then he says, Lehi responds, I know that I'm a visionary man, for if I had not seen the things of God in a vision, I should not have known the goodness of God, but had tarried in Jerusalem and had perished with my brethren. And say, but behold, I have obtained a land of promise, for which things I do rejoice. And then Lehi and Sariah, it's basically a testimony of God that he did the right thing, that God did provide a way to get those records. Okay, so now we have Lehi gets the records and searched them from the beginning. And we see the same thing with Mosiah, I think. Is that Mosiah? Yeah, I think he gets the Jaredite records that Alma the Younger found. Who found that? They found the Mulekites? Can't quite remember. So then he says he searches the plates from the beginning, and it had the 5 books of Moses, which gave an account of the creation of the world, and also Adam and Eve, who are our first parents. And also a record of the Jews from the beginning, even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, and all the prophecies of the holy prophets. And Lehi also found upon the plates of brass a genealogy of his fathers, wherefore he knew he was a descendant of Joseph. I always love our idea of being adopted into the tribe of Ephraim, which I think is the most common tribe. And I imagine that's got to be so offensive to the Jews. Or they just laugh at it, Hey, we're cousins. We belong to a different house of Israel. But I still think it's pretty fun. And then he said, these plates of brass should never perish, neither should they be dimmed any more by time. And he prophesied many things concerning his seed. And thus far my father had kept the commandments wherewith the Lord had commanded us. And in the next, I'm going to finish here with this story. We find out later, I believe, how important scriptures are, and why I'm pretty opposed to the idea that living prophets can just negate the entire book. I just don't think that's something someone can do. Then we obtained the records which the Lord had commanded us, and searched them and found that they were desirable, yea, even of great worth unto us, insomuch that we could preserve the commandments of the Lord unto our children. Wherefore it was wisdom in the Lord that we should carry them with us as we journeyed in the wilderness towards the land. So that's the end of the story of the brass plates. Okay, that's all I'm going to go over now. The next story, they go and find Ishmael and his daughters. And then we get into the tree of life. I love the symbolism of the tree of life, so I'll be spending some time on that. And that's all I have. This is the longest I've ever shot a video. I'm very tired, and I'm going to release this no matter how bad it is. So I hope some people found it interesting. I will continue next time with the tree of life.